several videos earlier, I gave you a function f of x equals x squared, and it turns out to be like this: f of x equals x squared. When you try and plot it, it's basically a quadratic going through the origin. And when we looked at this here, it's saying that get the old function, whatever it was, and then add 3. So it turns out to be you shifting up this graph by 3. Okay, and then we looked at this here, f of x plus 2, and that turns out to be like this. Well, f of x looks like this here. Well, f of 2x, well, everything gets shifted over by 2. So it basically turns out to be something like this. Okay, everything gets shifted over by 2. Now in this video we are going to look at what happens when you have f of 2x. Okay, well, remember the section on graphs. If you draw a graph of y equals x squared, it will look like this. Okay, now if you and then we also looked at what happens when you put a number in front of this x squared here. So if you put a 2 in here, and then we discovered that it sort of like gets squashed up, so it gets pushed in like this, and also like this here. And if you try and draw this here, f of say 3x squared, it will get pushed in even further. So it'd be something like that. It's sort of like squeezing the graph inwards. The bigger this number is. Well, anyway, let's try and investigate the relationship between f of x and f of 2x. Okay, so well, let's look at this here. This is a graph of the blue line here represents f of x. Okay, now we want to investigate f of say 2x. So here we would start off with something like this. Hang on. Well, let's start off with x here. Hang on. So down here it will be f of 2x. So here, draw a table here: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on here. Now let's look at 1 here. When you put 1, hang on, this is here. When you put 1 into this thing here, what was 1? Well, 1 times this 2 here will be 2. So it's a matter of you finding out f of 2. So well, f of 2 here will be 4 because this f of x here is defined as x squared. So when you work out 2 here, it's you putting the 2 into this x here, which in turn square it. You then in turn have to square it, so it becomes a 4. Now look, so what that means is when x here is 1, this here will be 4. Okay, so basically when x is 1 here, you are getting f of 2 of the old graph. Now f of 2 was here, so really what's happening is it's getting shifted across like this. You see what I mean later on. Hang on. So here when you come to work out f of 2, and then when you put this 2 into this thing here, well, you working out f of 2 is the equivalent of you working out f of 4 of the old graph, because when you put 2 into this thing here, this whole thing here will be 4. That's why it's the equivalent of you working out f of 4. So what that means is on this axis here, on the vertical line here, when x is 2, you got to get what was f of 4 of what f of 4 of the old function, if you know what I mean. So here, hang on. So when it's 2 here, well, when you put 2 into this thing here, it's the same as you working out f of 4 of the old function. So f of 4 of the old function would be this. Hang on. Well, 5 is here, so 4 must be on this line here. So 4 going all the way up here would be here. So you working out f of 2, well, f of 2 is, well, this is 1, 2 here, so the new point will be here. Can you see? It was here, and then it gets shifted inwards like this. Okay, so you can see that it gets shifted inwards by 2. Sorry, it gets shifted inwards. Now, let's say if you go into the negative realm, let's say -1 and -2 here. Now, if you put -1 into this thing here, that will ultimately become f of -2. So along the 1 here, you have to get f of -2 of the old function. Now f of -2, well, this here is -1, -2 is here. So -2 lies here. So if you want to know -1 of this one here, you have to get what's -2 of the other one, if you know what I mean. So basically, you've got to get this one and move it across. So you can see that it's moving inwards here. Okay, yeah, so that's why. Well, I hope by looking at this, I know it sounds weird at first, but if you sit down and think about it, you can see that everything gets squashed up inwards. Okay, I know it's a bit weird, but you just have to sit there and stare at it. I guess I don't know how you do it, but it does actually get squashed inwards. Okay, all right.